Thanks for staying with us. Investigations continue into the storage of hazardous chemicals at the UPL warehouse in Umhlanga. The facility was set alight during last year's July unrest, sending toxic smoke into the air. It's then emerged that the warehouse owners didn't have the required licenses to store the hazardous chemicals. Newzroom Afrika's Karinda Jagmohan is live in the area. Karinda, very good afternoon to you. Last year, at around the same time, you were stationed where you are now as the factory was going up in flames.
That's correct. The factory was going up in flames, blowing toxic smoke into the air and over suburbs around it, including Karinda and Umhlanga. I'm going to show you the factory, but first, this flag was put up in the wake of the unrest. My colleague Lungelo Zungu showing you. It was one of those that you would see across KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng as part of the Rebuild South Africa program, just trying to bring together people in the wake of that devastation, and a symbol of hope for many, displaying that flag there. Now, in the meanwhile, the UPL warehouse is still under renovations. We took a drive past, but there is security that wouldn't allow us to set up closer. So my colleague Lungelo Zungu will show you in the distance. You'll see the remnants of that factory. Now, that factory is owned by a company based in India called UPL, an agrochemical manufacturer, and it was housing chemicals inside this warehouse. It's a suburban industrial area, and after the warehouse was set alight during the days of looting, there were investigations underway because of the effect of the smoke that was coming out. It later emerged, that there were several hazardous and banned chemicals being stored inside this warehouse, and that too without the proper process being followed. Allegedly, according to the preliminary reports, is that the warehouse owners did not follow the protocol by eThekwini to actually house these chemicals, and when it went up in flames, the results were disastrous. In fact, still there is a police investigation ongoing, and so far we know that over 18 million kilograms of solid waste and over 58 million liters of liquid and 3,900 kilograms of dead fish have been removed from this area. Parts of the Umhlanga beach and surrounding areas were closed for several weeks following this, and you could even see the pollution in the water. The water itself had changed color, and what we were told is that the environmental impact from that warehouse catching alight and the pollution it created would last for several years. So this is just one example of how the looting actually had an effect on this warehouse, but ultimately followed through with an expose with regards to what was inside this warehouse. Now, the warehouse management as well as stakeholders in the surrounding communities have since formed what they call a multi-stakeholder forum to discuss what will happen going forward, as many residents on the ground want the warehouse owners, the company, to be held accountable for the pollution that occurred here. But first, you can actually take a listen to our crossing at the warehouse when it caught fire, just to give you an idea of the impact of the toxic smoke that was in the air, and then listen to Minister Barbara Creasy from the Environmental Affairs Department on the actual consequences of the event that occurred here. Take a listen. If our viewers can imagine the smell of chemicals in the air, we had to move away because it smells absolutely toxic, and even at one point just further away you can see a black on the ground. Police officers said, don't step on that because our shoes will get completely corroded. And this just goes to show how dangerous these chemicals are.
When you store thousands of liters of chemical concentrate, you trigger the requirement for a separate environmental authorization. If they had done that, and if they had followed the occupational health and safety regulatory environment, they would have had to do a risk assessment, which in our view would have revealed that they were a major hazard institution. Once you are defined as a major hazard institution, there are special processes put in place so that should there be a fire, a flood, an earthquake, or any other unforeseen disaster, the emergency authorities know that this is a hazardous institution and they know that the fire must be dealt with in a particular manner. Our firemen rushed to the scene with no protective clothing and doused the scene with water. They were not aware that this was a chemical installation. They were not aware that the air that they were breathing was loaded with chemicals.
Indeed. Indeed, well, there you have the Environmental Affairs Minister Barbara Creecy explaining the consequences of the pollution that we saw coming out from the UPL warehouse. Like I mentioned, it's still somewhat under construction, but still it's unclear whether or not that company will still be given the green light to go ahead with the storage of their chemicals here. Following the incident here, a number of media outlets conducted investigations into what was being stored here, and one investigative report from the Daily Maverick emerged showing that several banned chemicals were being housed here, and that the warehouse owners, UPL, based in India, did not actually follow the correct procedures. This entire event is still under investigation, but this is then just 1 point a year later. We see how the community was affected, people on the ground, the environment ultimately was impacted by what happened here in the wake of the July unrest, while thousands of businesses were damaged, 50 billion rand in losses to the local economy. But one sort of exposure was what was happening here at the UPL warehouse, where we see the consequences of it catching on fire, and ultimately the minister also saying that the damage, the environmental damage, will be felt for years to come because of the chemicals that were housed in this warehouse.
Very well, Karinda. Jagmohan, let's leave it there for now as, of course, we continue to reflect on the impact of the July unrest. Now,